Hello. Thank you, everyone, for coming out on a Sunday afternoon. My name is Laura Mott. I'm the curator of contemporary art and design here at Cranbrook Art Museum. And we have an amazing kind of roster of lectures and performance today, kind of amazing follow-up to our openings on Friday. We premiered a solo exhibition by Zack Ostrowski, aka Beverly Fre, Mr. Midwest, A Real Good Time, and premiered the performance Mr. Midwest, and we'll be doing an encore / public premiere of that performance at 5 o'clock today. So he's going to lecture now and then following at 4 p.m., Patrick Hill will be talking. Patrick is a sculptor who just added 2 new amazing works to our Hall of Wonders exhibition. That's an exhibition based on our collection and inspired by 16th and 17th century cabinet of curiosities. And part of the programming is to always really embrace that idea of curiosity and have a rotating group of artists and performers responding to the exhibition. So that was Patrick. Just made 2 incredible new works specifically in relationship to certain artworks in that show. And then coming up on March 6th, we'll be having an artist talk with Adam Lee Miller, who's part of the Theater of the Mind, followed with our final act of curiosity by dancer Biba Bell and musician Robert Aki Aubrey Lowe from New York City. They're going to be creating a new dance work in that space. It's going to be really something. So I want to start off by introducing our first speaker, Beverly Fre. He's an artist, musician, and breaker of several Guinness Book of World Records. He has a BFA from the College of Creative Studies and an MFA from Cranbrook Academy of Art, where we are now, and he was a recipient of the 2009 Daimler Emerging Artist Award. Currently, he's an assistant professor and graphic art area head at DePaul University in Chicago. His work was recently featured in Emerging Index, published by Ugly Duckling Press, and featured in the exhibition A Study of Midwestern Appropriation, curated by Michelle Grabner. His work is represented in numerous private and public collections, including the DePaul Art Museum and the Maxine and Stuart Frankel Foundation of Art. He has exhibited within the U.S. and abroad, including shows and performances in China, Japan, Peru, Poland, Ukraine, Czech Republic, and Germany. So please help me welcome Beverly Fre.
Thanks, Laura. It's good to be back. Thanks for coming out, everybody. What's all this? So this talk is I'm gonna try to attempt to answer that question. What's all this? The focus of the talk is mainly gonna be on my performance work that led up to the exhibit in the museum now. POV. I'm really excited, and I think my work comes from my love of a lot of different things. I get obsessed easily and excited all the time. My wife gets annoyed by it. Every week is something new. Right now I'm really into strong children, bodybuilders, Y2K paraphernalia, and job training videos. I'm trying to start a job training archive with my colleague Greg Scott. So I love all kinds of different things. If it was up to me, I would just go through enjoying, taking in, consuming all of these lovely things that I get obsessed with. Unfortunately, I have a theory where if you get more than 4 people together, some bullshit starts to happen, and people start they don't want you to have a good time. They don't want you to enjoy things. They try to make it difficult and complicated. Because of that, I have this hatred deep inside and this restlessness because I want to enjoy things. I want to get out there. I want to have a good time. But there's always things that are holding you back. There's always people that are in your way that want to make it harder to do that. So that restlessness, that tension is really what drives a lot of my work. And that's like really prevalent growing up in the Midwest. Like I always wanted to do these things, but I had no outlets. I had no resources. I had no examples. So I'm just kind of wandering nervous. And in case you think this is a joke, here's proof. This is the first piece of real artwork I ever made. It's called Magic Eraser. If I had a magic eraser, I would erase school because I don't like work. If I had a magic eraser, I would erase my bus driver because she's always late. If I had a magic eraser, I would erase the people I hate because I hate them. And that just goes to show you, like, from early on, I had a strong point of view. I wanted to do things on my own terms. I had a hatred and a distrust of authority, a distrust of institutions, public transportation, and just mainstream society at large. So what am I supposed to do? So as I got older, I started trying to seek out like-minded people. And as I began to try to make a career for myself, I sought out these people as examples, like who has done work on their own terms. And I found that my influences come from a variety of different places. And it's all work from people that are doing work on their own terms. They're making valuable contributions to their discipline, but they're also challenging that discipline. And that's the point of view that I set out to make my work from. And when you're doing that, the persona is a really convenient vehicle because people understand the persona. It has a history, and it's kind of an entry point into the work itself. I personally don't like the term. I don't think it necessarily makes sense for what I'm doing, but I do use it. Mainly because academic people understand it. It's good to use it to get grants, and it's a good entry point into the work. And I think, if anything, persona talks about a different behavioral model, and I think that I utilize various personas then throughout the day. Like there's maybe a persona that I have to put on in order to listen like a customer service representative, a persona that like allows me to get my groceries, allows me to get an oil change. If anything, I'm acting when I'm doing those things, and when I'm on stage, I'm more at peace. I'm more in tune in doing the things that I enjoy doing. And also the name itself, Beverly Fre, is kind of a nickname that I've been using the past, 6 years or so, 7 years. And that's also an entry point into the work. So if you say like, this guy Dave Smith, he's an artist, you have no idea what the fuck he makes. If you say Beverly Fre, this guy's an artist, like you don't know exactly what I do, but it gives you an inkling of like some kind of window, insight into what I might be up to. So I think a nickname tells you more about the person than your actually given name, and that's also an entry point into the work. So the persona and the nickname are kind of just me being a nice guy helping people out. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about my previous work that frames some of the current work that I'm doing now. This is some stills from a piece called Landmarks, where I was doing impromptu interventionist performances at historical landmarks. So this is Machu Picchu and the Great Wall of China. And this is early work right before I went to Cranbrook and while I was at Cranbrook my first year. So the idea is that normally when you go to these places of historical importance, you're kind of a passive observer. You're passively looking at the beautiful history. Look at this beautiful environment. Let me check this out. When a performer enters the space, that dynamic completely shifts and there's a fight for power. And that was interesting to me, that a performance could have that much influence on this history, and this beauty could just become kind of flattened out as a backdrop. But the idea of interventionist performance, the idea of looking for outlets outside of conventional structures is important to what I'm doing now. It's another still from Checkpoint Charlie in Berlin. So there's kind of, at the moment, there's two different ways that I'm working, doing stuff outside in the field, but then also figuring out how I can keep that same sensibility and bring that work inside of an institution. Now, I'm not interested in just kind of transplanting, taking something from the outside, putting it into a gallery, and because it's recontextualized, it's now art. That's not interesting to me. What I want to do is figure out the inherent structures of these social conditions, of the institutions, and figure out how I can use those to my advantage and how I can also challenge them. So this is Be Fresh. This is my Cranbrook degree show piece. So at this show, I built like kind of a stage set that existed as a stage, but also an installation on its own. And I rapped at the opening. I also set and broke several Guinness Book World Records. It's the tallest stack of rap tapes. This is me attempting the world's furthest spit. And you can see I didn't win that one. You can see it's a pretty heavy, big sucker up there in the top corner. I broke the world record for breaking the most amount of eggs in my head. At the end, I was a glorious egg-covered champion of the world. And at the time, I thought I was interested in performance within a museum context, how I could do that. And I thought the piece was mainly about spectacle, which I guess on the surface level it sort of is. But now looking back, I realize that it's more about performance devices and more about cultural rituals. And I think this was a seed for a lot of the work that I'm doing now. It's also, I think, important just to stop on this piece, which is my album Bed that came out a couple years ago, limited edition red vinyl. It's been called a masterpiece. It's been called a contemporary classic. It'll be for sale for $10 after the performance. If you don't have it, I think I recommend picking it up. But this to me was a really kind of monumental work. People call it an experimental album. I think it's actually the most traditional piece of work that I've ever done. And that's what I set out to do, to create a classic 90s inspired rap album. So it kind of follows all of those structures. And in the traditional sense of an early rap record, it's all from my point of view. So this record talks about my friends, it talks about my family, it talks about where I grew up, which is very typical of the rapper point of view. And I felt like I accomplished this, and since then I've been looking for new ways to challenge my writing. So I want to write now from other people's perspectives, not necessarily my own, less reflective, and then also get out on the road, have some new adventures, and have some things to write about. With the new show that I have up, if you guys stick around for the performance, you'll see that it's kind of a departure from the role of the rapper. So I've been rapping pretty much my entire life. I started in 3rd grade, and I started performing regularly when I was 16. Variety of different names, variety of different groups. So I love rap music, and it's a big part of what I do, but my most recent work is kind of trying to depart from that role of the rapper and looking at what influences rap music, looking at its lineage. So I'm drawing now a lot from folk and blues and just the art of storytelling. And I think it's important, early on, it was important for me to distinguish myself from surface level parody. So if you look at the piece, the SNL skit, I'm sure you guys all know that. If you don't, you can understand what it's about just by looking at that still. You can understand it's an ironic parody. You don't even have to see it to know the message. This piece, I feel, you see this, you don't know what the hell's going on, and hopefully you want to know more. So to me, this is much more complex, much more confusing, and a much more exciting kind of platform to make work from. So I'm interested in moving beyond surface level parody, exploring humor in a range of different ways, from challenging to thought-provoking, and also getting beyond rap music now. So to further that kind of a descent from mainstream thought and mainstream ways of working, this is where I make my work. So the past 6 years, I've been mainly doing work in places like this. I don't have a fancy studio. I don't have pretty much no resources, no tools, just myself and my 2006 Kia. We hit the road and we make the most of it. And I'm interested in the rural Midwest specifically because that's where I grew up. And I think it's misunderstood. I think it's under-examined, underexplored. And to me, this in-between state is a really fertile ground for exploration. That undefined state is really exciting. So this is the context in which I choose to research and explore and execute my work. So this is an overview of like my structural approach to making work. So I'm interested in how meaning is produced and shared. It's really fascinating to me to understand how something becomes meaningful, who makes it meaningful, how is that meaning carried on, how do we know that we're looking at something meaningful. So I analyze those structures and I tweak them out and I make something new. So beyond that, I start to look at how meaning is produced and shared, but also in what context, what format, what are these vehicles for transferring meaning. So things like songs, dances, jokes, storytelling, those have been around forever. They exist in every single culture, and they're great structures to work within. And then looking at the context of where these things are exchanged, so different events, rituals, social gatherings, and then the specific devices that transmit this communication. So like PowerPoints, newsletters, bathroom graffiti, all those are outlets for expression. And what are the inherent behaviors of all of those? So for example, PowerPoint, you probably haven't seen an offensive PowerPoint or like a racist PowerPoint. I'm sure they exist, but they're not common, right? You make a PowerPoint and you behave within the structure of PowerPoint. Same thing with newsletters. Most of them are boring. You never find a poetic, beautiful newsletter. So to me, these are all opportunities to either obey the structure, to use it successfully, or to kind of break the rules, break the structure apart, reimagine it, and create something new out of it. So that leads me to the Outskirts series, which is the bulk of this discussion. This is a series of work that I started in 2012, and it's an ongoing series. It's going to eventually take place in every Midwestern town. So far, I've covered Michigan, Illinois, and Indiana extensively. And I use kind of performative research as a means of inquiry to combine, document, and examine the production, consumption, and sharing of meaning throughout the world Midwest. So part of this series is just research. So going out and collecting ephemera, documenting the events and things like that. So here's some examples of, I'm starting an archive of my ephemera from my adventures. So things like t-shirts, newsletters, pamphlets that help sustain the event, that help to document and transmit the memory of that event after it's occurred. And then also artifacts, so things like VHS tapes. And of course my award collection, which I'm really proud of, and the business card archive that I'm starting, which is really great. And also some of these things are artifacts that I make, that I bring to the events, like the pancake prop, so things that are made specifically for events. So here's some more examples of pamphlets, takeaways, things that I'm creating on site at these different events. And a lot of the shit, like, you can't buy on Amazon, right? So it's also like a descent from mainstream. Like, you're not gonna find applause in how to get it at Barnes and Noble. And then, so also documenting the different ways people are communicating, the different ways they're expressing themselves. So here's a nice example. Nothing really commercial about that. And then this is a condition that I kind of came upon by accident, and now that I specifically look for. And to me, this is really fascinating, and I call it the confused object, where the condition is kind of at odds and there's two conflicting messages happening at the same time. But the overarching gesture is completely sincere. And to me, that's a really complicated thing, even though it appears boring and ordinary. So I think there's a ton of potential there. Here's another example. I don't know if this is parody or pride or ironic or celebratory. So there's this kind of internal conflict, which I think is really great. And actually this, I've used this as a model for the work that I've produced in the show that has this kind of internal tension. And then also documenting symbols that get forced together, contrasting symbols, symbols from completely different realms. So to me, that's also a really great condition, and that inspires a lot of my work. And this, I know it's hard to tell what the hell this is, it's all blurry, but this is one of the best things I've ever seen. It was a mobile home. This guy shows up at all these county fairs, and he has all these different, he makes vinyl t-shirts, custom vinyl t-shirts, prints them on the spot, and you just pick something. You say, and he's got all these symbols and sayings and phrases. So you say, I want Nike, I want girls are awesome, boys suck. And like you just pair all the phrases and the symbols together and you make a custom shirt. You want to say, I want Krusty the Clown, fuck Obama, America, USA on the back. You can make it. If you want Chevy, Chevy is number one, you can do that. If you want Calvin and Hobbes pissing on Chevy, you can do that. So he has it all covered, every single audience, every single point of view. He's got something for you. He's making money off of everybody. And I love that it's open, it's completely universal. It's not inclusive of one point of view. It's open, it's fluid. I identify with that. And also that I love that he's using these symbols as structural building blocks. So it means one thing, you pair it together with something else, it means something else, you take something else, it changes the whole deal around. So that is also is a way that I work, and I'm finding that is already existing out in the Midwest. So kind of drawing those similarities out. I've also been starting an archive of bathroom graffiti, which is also a great outlet to express yourself, for better or worse. The piece on the right, Tim is gay on his Harley, was one that just stuck with me and it kind of kept me up at night because the internal logic of it, I just couldn't understand. If Tim is always a gay man and he just happens to ride a motorcycle, Harley brand, or is there something about the Harley that once he sits on it, he turns gay, which is really a mind-blowing thing to think about. So, and just to show you how I work, so this is something that I found that stuck with me that I couldn't shake. So I wrote a song about it, and then that song ended up becoming, the production and execution of that song ended up becoming a scene in a feature film that will hopefully be shown at Wayne State the next time I come around at the end of the month. It's called Bathtub Songs. All right, so here's the basic structure that I set up for myself when I set out to the Outskirts. And this is the structure that I've been using for the first round. It's looking at analyzing how meaning is shared and produced, looking at the context and where this stuff happens, and using active participation, disruption, and reconfiguration to analyze these conditions. So I'll start off going by through active participation. So this is the first event that I participated in, and it's mainly just taking part of in pre-existing events. So this is a pet and owner look-alike costume competition, and it's kind of hard to see, but I borrowed my friend's dog, and I made him like a pork chop necklace, which is one of my my motifs, and we gave him a little like Sharpie t-shirt like the one I wear, and some fur on his shoulders. And I got all the stuff at a dollar store down the street 10 minutes before the show, and I was sitting down on the sidewalk making my costume. And the organizers came over and were like, "What are you doing with all this junk?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm gonna enter that competition." And they were like, don't bother. This lady, whatever her name is, she wins every year, and you have no hope of winning, especially with that pile of trash that you got. And they're like, her dog was injured last year, and we thought that maybe somebody else would get a chance to win. But she shows up as he was a wounded Vietnam veteran, and she totally stole the show. So I was like, whatever, I'll give it a shot. So that's the lady, which I think she became pretty weak after the Vietnam vet. She just might have lost all her steam. So she was like a bumblebee. So I ended up totally destroying her. I got first place. And to be honest, it felt really good. And I became really competitive after this. But my self-esteem was knocked down pretty quick. Because after that, I entered a pizza eating competition, and this is the guy that took first place, And I'd been training for this and studying different techniques, but he came totally from left field with this technique that I'd never read about, where like he just would mush everything in his mouth, and his cheeks were huge, like Dizzy Gillespie style, and it just broke, his saliva just broke everything down into a mush, and then he would just like swallow it. So he destroyed everybody. I got fourth place, but I didn't get a medal or anything. So after that, I was like, I gotta redeem myself. So I went to an annual potato decorating competition in Henry, Illinois, and I did my research, I prepped, and I decided like I'll bring my own ingredients because they provide stuff, but I was like, I'll bring some shit that nobody else has that'll separate me from the crowd. So I have baby corn, flaming hot Cheetos, coconut, and the secret was tuna fish, which I used for the hair to kind of get the texture of the hair. So I thought, this is a self-portrait, I thought that I did a really nice job. And it turns out it backfired on me because the judges were two middle school girls. And when they came around to judge mine, it smelled really bad. And they were kind of really grossed out by it. So I didn't place at that one either. So now I've been like feeling like shit. I've like been losing. I was off to like kind of had beginner's luck. So I went down this downward spiral, and then I saw that my hometown, St. Clair County, was having their annual 4-H fair. So I was like, I'll go back home and try to redeem myself. So I entered the annual rooster crowing competition, and you're looking at the rooster crowing king of St. Clair County right there. All right. So that was active participation. The second way that I'm analyzing these cultural rituals is through disruption. So going to a set format and then becoming an agitator, disrupting the condition and seeing what happens. And this is the first one that I did. It was at a pancake breakfast. Usually that's a tradition to kick off most county fairs. So I wrote a song specifically for the event. It was a jazzy tune about pancakes. I'll give you a little taste. Put that in a pan, Dan, slap that on a plate. Jake got a belly full of batter, but it really don't matter. She would love me anyway. Hey, I'm making pancakes. Yeah, we cooking pancakes. Wow, put it down till it's round, flip it on back around. This side, that side, girl, you know it's all right. Pancakes, and on and on. Jazzy tune, celebrating breakfast. Real good, real nice. But I thought because I'm acting in an unusual way, people will be hostile towards it. I've been doing the interventionist pieces at tourist destinations, but I realized this is going to be different because when you're at a historical landmark, everybody's an outsider, everybody's a tourist, nobody belongs there. So they feel less authority to intervene. In the small town, everybody knows you're the outsider. And I know from growing up in a small town, people often are just looking for a fight because it's something to do. And I've done that myself. So you're just fucking bored. So you want to see some action. So I thought, well, I prepared for the worst. So I did my piece, and like a couple people clapped. A lot of people just like, oh, whatever. And so I just stayed and I ate more pancakes. And I ended up sticking around and talking to people afterwards, and nobody mentioned like, oh, why did you do that? What was that song about? Nobody cared at all. So I thought, well, that's not what I expected, and that's a good sign. So I set out to do that more, different places. This is a piece called Ode to Ricky Dunn and Mookie Blaylock. So I went on a tour of a gravesite in Lakeside Cemetery in Colon, Michigan, the self-proclaimed magic capital of the world. And all these small-time magicians meet there to exchange tricks, tell stories. And I went on a gravesite tour, and I learned about the world's most famous pickpocket, Ricky Dunn, who used pickpocketing as a form of entertainment. So I wrote an ode to him and performed it as a tribute at his gravesite. So some of these performances are solo, some of them are site-specific, like those two. This one is in collaboration and totally impromptu. So I went to, in Henry, Illinois, I went to see the Marshall Putnam Choir recital, high school choir, and then afterwards I just jumped up on stage, asked these guys if they wanted to do something with me. They were immediately on board, and while their family and friends are still in the audience, we just did an impromptu performance of this pancake song. So recontextualizing the pancake song, doing it in a different setting, creating something that's not site-specific, and also in impromptu collaboration. So a couple different methods of working. Also doing things where there's no audience. So just like performance as an intervention into everyday life. And then also looking at different methods of how this work is documented and transmitted. So a video, maybe no documentation at all. This one is done specifically for a photograph series in collaboration with Travis Rose, who's in the house tonight. And then looking at how the residue of performance can kind of stand on its own. So documenting the aftermath and some of the props. This kind of takes it a step further. This is a couple stills from a series in that series that I haven't shown before, but I really like. And to me, they're just trying to document restlessness in a different way. So these are kind of like these installations that I do that, to be honest, I have no idea what they mean, but I really like them and I feel like I have to do them. So maybe at some point they'll turn into something, but that's Jay Swan. Here's Jake Blue Sea. And the last method of examination is reconfiguration. So taking those structures and kind of meddling with them. Like the ode is a structure that I often use in my work. And I think it works good, and I usually pair two unlike things together, force them together, and draw out their similarities, or use them as structural building blocks. And the ode also shows my influences. So for example, I have an ode to Woody Guthrie and Spice One. It goes, take you riding in my car, car, take you riding in my car, car, take you riding in my car, car, take you riding in my car. Take you riding in my car. My gun goes click, click, clack, clack. My gun goes click, click, clack, clack. My gun goes click, click, clack, clack. Bo, bo, picky, picky, bo. So, it's using Woody Guthrie's car song and the automatic shotgun blasts of Spice One's hook, and using them as structural building blocks, putting them together, and structurally it creates a drive-by. And it also draws influences between folk music as a precursor to rap music, and then just showing that, like, I know Spice One's catalog just as much as I know Woody Guthrie's catalog. So this is, I showed this earlier, it's my album cover. And it also draws out my influences. So I structured this piece to be an ode to Lenny Bruce, who in many ways I think I'm able to do some of the stuff I do because he came before me and broke a lot of barriers. So this is my nod to him. And again, showing my influences, paying homage to them. Payton. Did anybody meet Payton on Friday? A couple people. So if you haven't met him, he's that guy behind me there. And you'll meet him tonight, hopefully. And my colleague Greg and I, we kind of helped bring him to life. We found him and brought him to life. And he, I think, he's our mascot. And he embodies restlessness in many ways. And the structure for my show in the museum is I'm looking at different archetypes: the professional, the seeker, and the innocent, and the badass. And Payton, he kind of embodies all of them. So he has this fluid identity. He's an innocent, like a little man-child. He's a professional mascot. He's a fucking badass. and he's always looking to get into something. And then also kind of following up on the fluidity of symbols, complex symbols, confused symbols. I like appropriate often from myself and use these motifs in different ways. So the pancake is at once a mask, a disguise, it's an innocent prop, it's an innocent premise for a song, and then it also becomes sinister. So eventually over the tour it evolved into this like dark, subconscious, anti-comedy, which is some of the video on the bottom, which I believe is in the museum. And then it's also kind of extrapolated into a physical stage that's a platform for more performance. So this is the structure of the current mode that I'm working. Starting at the bottom with the Outskirts as kind of performative research, going out, having adventures, doing these quick interventionist performances. That builds up to Mr. Midwest, which is a one-man show. So the piece that I'll do tonight is a 40-minute one-man show, and that kind of synthesizes all the experiences of the Outskirts into one-man show that combines songs, dances, storytelling, and jokes. And then the top level is Real Good Time, which you're gonna have tonight. And that title is kind of a variable that'll change out each time I do a larger exhibition show, and that's like kind of the general overarching theme. So this is a mock-up of the museum space, and like I said, this exhibit focuses on analyzing different archetypes: the professional, the innocent, the badass, and the seeker. Each one of those correspond to a different stage set, except for the seeker, he's kind of free-floating. And it looks at exposing the mechanisms of performance, establishing and also undermining archetypes. So a lot of these things are supposed to be strange and familiar. There's something that's ordinary that draws you in, but then there's something that's unexpected or undermines the logic of what you're looking at. And that in-between state, that confused state, I think, is an opportunity for critical thought. And also, what an important thing with this exhibition is this is an entirely new set, completely new material, and I've written everything from somebody else's point of view. So normally, a lot of my work is personal. This is all drawing from actual personal experiences, people that I met. But I'm kind of embodying different characters, inhabiting different points of view. And also the museum experience is supposed to be, I guess, an opportunity for other people to perform. So one of the things that has came out of the Outskirts series is that I found that people, the first question everybody asks is like, how many times have you been arrested? How many times have you been beat up on that Outskirts tour? And luckily it hasn't happened at all yet. And what I found is that people love it. People like me are looking for unconventional outlets to perform. We want to engage with life in a different way, but we don't know how. And I'm hoping that this museum experience can be an outlet for different ways for people to engage in performance in a way that they normally wouldn't. And judging based on Friday, I think it's working so far. So it's going to be a real good time, and I see my work as kind of a conduit for performance, collaborative performance in general. So one of the things that I'm really interested in is the idea of myth and kind of confusing reality and fiction. And the show upstairs is supposed to be also blending reality and caricature. And I'm interested in the idea of storytelling and the work having a life of its own after it's performed. Since performance is inherently ephemeral, how do you make it exciting after it's already done? And what I love is when the work becomes something completely different after it's done. So through the social act of storytelling, my work gains new dimension. So for example, this is something that just happened with my colleague Greg and I are teaching a class called The Art of the Hustle. And part of the class is we're actually hustling our students. They don't necessarily know it, but we got them in on, they were like a test group for this performance. And one of the girls said a line that I won't repeat, but she was like, that line was my favorite part of the show. and I never said it. It was something that she made up and misunderstood and heard in her own mind, but it wasn't something I actually said. So I used that, and now that line is part of my show. But that, I think that memory is not totally reliable. And then when we try to kind of transmit these things onto somebody else, there's a lot of opportunity for miscommunication, which I think is really exciting. And that kind of builds this myth and adds an extra dimension to the work itself. And then my ultimate goal, since I hate public transportation authority, people in general, all of those things, is mobility. So I love art, I love music, I love all of these different things, but I don't feel like I belong in any of them properly, and I don't want to give myself over entirely to any of these things. So I want to be mobile. I want to be able to do work in the academy, the club, on the street, and in the gallery. And I think that flexibility is something that not a lot of people can pull off. Like, for example, if like Matthew Barney did something at like some shitty bar in Wisconsin, it would like ruin his reputation. But I want to be able to do anything, anywhere, at any time, and treat all of those things equally as important. So that's kind of my general strategy, my point of view, and my way of working. And I think that by doing that, in some ways, it kind of forces these different venues to confront each other. So that's all. Thanks for listening.